For much of humanity's past, the idea of a humane execution would have sounded absurd. Death sentences weren't meant to be gentle, they were designed to terrify, and often carried out using the most grotesque and imaginative forms of torture people could dream up. Some were so savage, they feel almost unreal to us now. But make no mistake, they happened. In this episode, we're diving into 3 of the most agonizing execution methods ever created. These punishments weren't just about ending a life, they were crafted to send a message. Each victim's torment was put on display, a chilling reminder of who held the power. Fear was the ultimate weapon. We begin with one of the longest and arguably most nightmarish methods ever devised: Scaphism, also known as the boats. This ancient Persian form of execution wasn't just meant to kill, it was engineered to prolong suffering, dragging the victim's pain out over several days, sometimes even weeks. The Greek historian Plutarch gives us a chilling account of this method, describing how it was used on Mithridates, a Persian soldier whose only crime was bragging, a mistake that led to a death more horrifying than words can capture. Mithridates was a soldier under King Artaxerxes II, ruler of the Persian Empire, a sprawling realm that stretched across what we now know as Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Egypt. In the 4th century BC, Artaxerxes' time on the throne was plagued by internal unrest, including a failed uprising led by his own brother, Cyrus the Younger. After the rebellion, Mithridates boasted that he had been the one to kill Cyrus, hoping the claim would earn him recognition and reward. But his words clashed with the version of events the king wanted the world to believe, that Cyrus had fallen at the hands of royal troops. Seeing this as a direct insult to his authority, King Artaxerxes himself ordered Mithridates to face death by Scaphism. In his work, The Life of Artaxerxes, Plutarch describes the king's terrifying sentence. Mithridates was to die by the boats, an execution carried out in a gruesome and deliberate way. 2 wooden boats, built to perfectly align with each other, were used. The victim was laid on his back in one, then sealed in with the second, leaving only his head, hands, and feet sticking out, while the rest of his body remained tightly enclosed. From there, the torment began. Mithridates was forced to swallow a thick mix of milk and honey, and then the same sticky mixture was smeared all over his face and exposed skin. The milk and honey had a cruel double effect. Not only did it keep the victim nourished just enough to delay death, but it also triggered violent diarrhea, which slowly filled the cramped space inside the boats. And as grim as that sounds, it was only the beginning. Plutarch goes on to describe the horror in chilling detail. The executioners would keep the victim's face constantly facing the sun, where it would soon be swarmed and completely buried beneath clouds of flies. Meanwhile, inside the sealed boat, the effects of the milk and honey took hold, and as the waste built up, it began to rot. From that filth, insects and parasites would breed, crawling into the victim's body and slowly eating him alive, from the inside out. You might imagine that simply leaving him to die like this would be cruel enough, but no, his torment wasn't over. Every single day, Mithridates was pulled out of the boats, force-fed more milk and honey, and checked to make sure he was still breathing, only to be shoved right back into his living tomb. Normally, this kind of torture would claim a victim's life within just a few days, but Mithridates, with a staggering will to survive, endured this nightmare for more than 2 weeks, nearly 17 days. His body clung to life as infection slowly consumed him, while swarms of flies, bees, and wasps gnawed and tunneled into his flesh, and worms chewed their way back out, bringing with them a level of pain and degradation almost beyond comprehension. Humiliation, because as Mithridates died, slowly, in agony, and in complete isolation, he understood that this wasn't just the end of his life. It was the legacy he'd leave behind. The boats were often stationed in public spots, like riverbanks, where ordinary people could witness the horror unfold, the unbearable stench, the rotting filth, the cries of madness and suffering. It wasn't just about death, it was about stripping away every last shred of dignity. But why go to such horrifying lengths? According to the Greek historian Ctesias, who offered rare glimpses into life inside the Persian royal court, the goal of Scaphism wasn't merely execution, it was complete and utter humiliation. The victim was turned into a breathing display of agony, a walking, then rotting, warning to anyone thinking of challenging the king's authority. Defy me, and you won't just die, you'll be erased as something less than human. You'd expect that when faced with such a horrifying end, anyone would try anything to escape it, even ending their own life before being devoured alive. But sadly, as we mentioned earlier, the victims were wedged tightly between the two boats, their hands and feet bound so securely they couldn't move, not even enough to act. It was, in every sense, as cruel and degrading a death as one could imagine. And yet, thousands of miles away in Imperial China, another brutal method, Lingchi, or death by 1,000 cuts, seemed to rival even Scaphism in cruelty. Like its Persian counterpart, its purpose wasn't just to kill, but to deliver unbearable pain while reinforcing the state's grip on power through sheer terror and brutality. Lingchi, unlike the almost mechanical cruelty of Scaphism, was reserved for only the gravest offenses, crimes like treason or the murder of one's own parents. It became infamous for its slow, intentional brutality, where the victim was dismembered piece by piece, transforming their final moments into a gruesome public display. Lingchi first emerged during the Tang dynasty, near the end of the first millennium AD, but it gained broader use in the centuries that followed, particularly under the Song and Yuan dynasties. Shockingly, the practice continued all the way up until 1912, when it was finally banned, largely due to mounting pressure from Western nations. The term Lingchi literally means slow slicing or lingering death, highlighting just how prolonged and torturous the process truly was. The executioner's role wasn't simply to end a life, it was to stretch the suffering, making sure that death came slowly and painfully. Sir Henry Norman, a British parliamentarian who saw the horror firsthand, recounts it in his book, The People and Politics of the Far East. The executioner, seizing chunks of flesh from areas like the thighs and chest, slices them off bit by bit. The limbs are then dismembered gradually, wrists and ankles, followed by elbows and knees, then shoulders and hips. In the end, the heart is pierced and the head is severed. The most thoroughly documented and final officially sanctioned case of Lingchi took place in 1905. A Mongol guard named Fu Chu Li was executed in Beijing for killing his master, a Mongolian prince, who had allegedly tried to assault Fu Chu Li's wife. Strapped to a wooden frame in a crowded public square, his execution was carried out in full view of Western diplomats, missionaries, and photographers, which is why, hauntingly, we still have photographs capturing the entire ordeal. When the execution began, the executioner started with shallow cuts to the chest and limbs, methodically peeling away the flesh in a slow, almost ceremonial fashion. French observer Georges Dumas, who witnessed it firsthand, is quoted in Death by 1,000 Cuts describing the scene. Each incision was deliberate, a testament to the skill of the executioner. His knife flickered, tearing flesh from the bone, and yet, the condemned man still drew breath. This painstaking, deliberate process could stretch on for hours, as executioners were specifically trained to prolong the victim's life for as long as humanly possible. Only when death seemed truly near would they deliver the final cuts, usually to the heart or neck, making sure that every ounce of suffering had already been wrung from the body. In many cases, families of the condemned would bribe the executioner, either to give the victim opium to dull the pain, or to discreetly make the final cuts early, sparing them from the agony, while leaving only the lifeless body to be carved. But Fu Chu Li wasn't granted that mercy. Reports say he endured nearly 50 cuts before death finally took him, a harrowing scene that left witnesses in shock and laid bare the full brutality of Lingchi. Most people would have bled out long before reaching that point, but Fu Chu Li's will endured far beyond what most could bear. Tragically, it was that very spirit that suffered next. Lingchi didn't just inflict unimaginable physical agony, it carried deep cultural and spiritual consequences as well. In Confucian society, the body was seen as sacred. Preserving it intact was a sign of respect, not just in life, but also in death. Mutilation was thought to disturb the spirit's journey, preventing it from finding peace in the afterlife. One passage from the Xiaojing captures this belief clearly. Our bodies, to every hair and bit of skin, are received from our parents, and we must not presume to injure or wound them. This is the beginning of filial piety. So, much like the victims of Scaphism, those who suffered under Lingchi weren't just subjected to unbearable pain in life. They were also, according to their own deeply held beliefs, denied peace in the afterlife, their torment ritualized and put on display for all to see. You'd think this, Garo, would be impossible to top, but there's still one more to witness, one final entry that takes cruelty to yet another level. Travel back a couple thousand years and several thousand kilometers southwest to South Asia, and you'll uncover the chilling practice of Garo, execution by elephant. These mighty animals, revered as emblems of power, royalty, and divine authority, were trained to kill with a terrifying blend of accuracy and raw force. The method was used by numerous empires, from the Mughals and Marathas to various sultanates across India, dating as far back as the Mauryan era, around 300 to 150 BC, and lasting all the way into the 20th century, when British colonial rule finally brought it to an end. This method was commonly used to punish crimes like high treason, desertion from the military, and even tax evasion, once again, not just to end a life, but to stage a powerful public display that reminded everyone of the ruler's absolute authority. But unlike the other forms of execution we've explored, this one came with a surprising amount of variation. The only consistent element was the elephant. The imagination of South Asian executioners seemed to know no limits, and fortunately, we have numerous first-hand accounts that give us a vivid sense of how these executions unfolded. One such account comes from the 1330s, recorded by the Muslim traveler Ibn Battuta, who witnessed a brutal execution during his time in Delhi. One day while I was present, Ibn Battuta recounts, several men accused of plotting to kill the vizier were brought out, their sentence, death by elephants, beasts trained not just to kill, but to dismember. Their feet were fitted with sharp iron blades, each tip like a knife. The elephant driver rode atop them, guiding their every move. When a man was thrown before them, the elephant would coil its trunk around him, fling him into the air, then seize him with its tusk and crush him underfoot, all following the driver's commands. If the emperor ordered the man torn apart, the elephant obeyed, slicing him into pieces and hurling the remains into the watching crowd. But if the order was to spare his life, for now, the man would be left lying before the emperor. Later, his skin would be flayed and stuffed with hay, while the meat was fed to the dogs. Now let's move a bit closer to modern times. In 1814, another brutal execution took place in Baroda, and its account is preserved in the Persia Anecdotes. The condemned was a slave who, just 2 days earlier, had killed his master, the brother of a local chieftain known as Amir Sahib. At around 11 o'clock, the account reads, the elephant was led out, ridden only by its driver and surrounded by locals holding bamboo sticks. The condemned man was laid on the ground about 3 yards behind the beast, his legs tied with 3 ropes fastened to a ring on the elephant's rear leg. With every step the elephant took, it yanked him forward, and every few steps, another limb seemed to dislocate, his body limp and shattered. After dragging him for about 500 yards, the man, caked in mud, was still alive, writhing in unbearable pain. For nearly an hour, this torture continued. Then, outside the town, the elephant, trained for exactly this, was guided backward and placed its foot firmly on the man's head. As you can see, there was no lack of imagination when it came to delivering punishment. And remember, these are just 2 examples among many. Across history, there are countless stories of shockingly brutal deaths carried out by these elephants and the men who controlled them. Some victims were trampled beneath heavy feet, others were slashed apart by sharpened tusks. Some were hurled again and again until their bodies were nothing but pulp. There were those who were torn limb from limb and left to bleed to death, and others crushed outright by the sheer weight of the beast towering above them. Thankfully, as mentioned earlier, British colonial influence eventually brought an end to this gruesome tradition. In 1914, Eleanor Maddock observed that in Kashmir, the arrival of Europeans had begun to erase many old customs. Among them, the terrifying practice of executing criminals using an elephant specifically trained for the task, a creature known by its hereditary name, Garo. As shocking and unreal as these punishments may seem to us today, the truth is, they were once a regular part of everyday life for much of civilized human history. People make mistakes, and in ancient societies, where imprisonment was a rare luxury, Those mistakes often ended in a death that felt more like something out of a nightmare than reality.